This week's video is sponsored by Valorey Photography Gloves. Valorey offer a number of supreme quality photography gloves, from lightweight merino wool liners to full-on expedition mitts for the most extreme shooting conditions. If you're in the market for a good pair of gloves or mitts designed just for photographers, head on over to photographygloves.com and use the code ADAM for free shipping worldwide. Hello everybody. Hope you're all doing well. A little frustrating. I looked out the window this morning up at a little mountain there, and I noticed there was some great looking fog. So I got all my stuff together and took a quick drive up there. Got a shot all set up, and fog dissipated, which happens more times than I'd like to admit. So I looked around and tried to find other compositions, but I just couldn't seem to find anything that I hadn't photographed before. And actually the subject that I was about to photograph was a subject that I had photographed before. It was some beautiful arbutus trees that are right on the edge of the cliff there. But rather than just write off the day, I started to think about what someone had mentioned in the comments a couple of weeks ago about talking or bringing up the whole art of cropping. And it's funny because when I first started photography, I was really set on staying within those confines of the format that I was using at that time, which was 35mm. And for quite a few years, and I guess even up until now, I always feel that I have to compose to the format that I'm using. And it wasn't really until probably when I started photographing for magazines that I realized that I really had to loosen up with my compositions. And actually the editor that I had at Gardens West, Dorothy Horton, she would often tell me to loosen up compositions so that they were able to crop, and also crop it so that they could put text in, either left, right, or if it was going to be used for a cover, then I needed to leave a lot more room at the top of the image. And it took me quite a while to kind of wrap my head around that. I just thought, oh, I can't leave that empty. It just doesn't look right in the frame. And the other day I was looking through some older photographs. I do this now and then. I'll just look through images that I've taken in the past, and they didn't quite work for some reason. But sometimes if you crop them a certain way, then you can bring those images back to life. And more recently, with the GFX 100 that I've been using and the GFX 50, I've been using the in-camera crop tool quite a bit. The nice thing about using a crop tool within the camera is that if you're shooting raw files, it doesn't permanently crop it. It's just a guide. So when I open up an image, say in Lightroom, it'll show the cropped version, but if you go into the crop tool, it'll also show you the whole frame. So nothing's really been lost. And the nice thing about that is that you can, if you didn't quite get it right the first time, then you're able to perhaps crop it slightly differently than what you initially had tried. So I thought what I would do is I'll show you the image that I took up at a little mountain. I did take one, but what I was hoping for was some fog behind the trees, and it was kind of foggy, but when I first got there was some beautiful fog behind the trees that really separated it from the background, but it also really brought the reds out of the arbutus trees. And I'd also like to show you some other images that I've either cropped in camera and give you the reasons why I cropped them that way, and also a couple of older images that I've been playing around with and I thought that they worked quite well, and I'll kind of go over my thought process and you can scrutinize them. You can, In the comments down below, you can tell me if you think it works or if it doesn't work, and whether you feel bound to the formats that you're using at the time, or whether you're quite loose with your shooting and crop afterwards. So it'd be kind of an interesting discussion. Incidentally, when it comes to the GFX 100, one of the reasons why I purchased a medium format camera was just so that I could do that. Now, most of the modern cameras these days have a crop feature in camera, and the thing about medium format is that as soon as I crop it, I'm not really losing a lot of those megapixels. And when it comes to printing large prints, I find that really handy. Now, of course, you could take any camera and you could do multiple images and then stitch them all together. It's quite easy to do. But I like to keep my life relatively simple, and I like it if I could just do it all in camera as much as possible. And that is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why I went with the medium format camera. I really love those extra megapixels, and it gives you a lot more space to crop and move things around. Whereas something like the X-T4, which I'm filming this with, it's a pretty small sensor, and as soon as you start cropping large chunks out of it, there isn't much left to blow up. Right, let's show you some examples, and you can tell me whether you like the examples or if you disagree with my analysis. All right, this is the image that I took this morning, and as you can see, you can just see the fog just above my head there. When I got to this location, you couldn't even see the cliff edge there. So there was some beautiful separation between the trees and the background, and the reds and oranges in these trees really stood out beautifully. Now, this is the raw file. This is the whole file, but this image here is what I composed for. So I turned on the crop feature in my camera, and this is the result that I wanted, but the fog just never came down. The other thing with this photograph that I didn't really notice is that I didn't give it enough depth of field. The trunk on the left side is a little bit out of focus, so I probably would have noticed it if I'd kept on photographing this, but I just couldn't see the point of continuing without that lovely fog in the background. And it's quite funny because this image here, which is one that I took last year, I guess, is more or less the same composition, except that we have much nicer light. And incidentally, this is actually a crop from a horizontal. I think I talked about this in a video that I made, I think last year, and then I cropped it because I just wanted to simplify the horizontal. I much prefer the vertical image. And since that time, I have taken vertical shots of this composition. Now, this photograph is one that I took on a trip with my friend Jeremy a couple of years ago up into the central portion of British Columbia, into the Chilcotin. And there was a lot of this kind of leaf litter with a bit of fall foliage, but I absolutely loved the subtle colors in this scene. And I took a number of shots, but none of them really worked. The problem with this type of photography is that it's very busy. There's a lot going on, and you might find one little section that works really well, but then there's a lot of leaf litter around it that just kind of distracts from the main subject. And that was kind of the case with this photograph here. Love the colors. I don't mind the chaos and the disorder, but trying to find something simple in a composition like this or a scene like this is very difficult. I find it very difficult. Sometimes I'll move things around just a little bit, but with subjects like this where you have frost, you run the risk of melting the frost with your fingertips. So I had another look at this photograph recently, and there's things about it that I really love. What I don't like is actually the right side of the photograph. There's a lot of empty space in there. There's not an awful lot going on other than there's some nice little colors in there. But most of the interest I found was on the left side. And then of course we have those brighter leaves in there. So what I've done here is try to think about, well, what is it that I really like about the photograph? I really love the frosty leaves on the left side. I love those grasses and the subtle reds and the oranges and greens. And when you look at the left side compared to the right side doesn't really have anything to offer to the whole photograph. So I've cropped it out so that it's not in the frame. And the idea behind cropping is to crop out the areas that just don't add anything to the overall composition, or perhaps your main subject gets lost in all the clutter that's around, and that's a great way to use cropping. So as you can see in here, I think this is a vast improvement. It would have been great to have perhaps a leaf in the lower left, just to kind of fill that space in a little bit. But I really love the grasses and the flow of this photograph. And what I've done in the final image here is I've just done a little bit of dodging and burning to bring out certain areas and darken areas as well to kind of hide them a little bit. This photograph here is somewhat of an odd one, and it's one that I've been sitting on for quite some time now. It was a photograph that I took probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, and I actually did make a video of this area. It's Lac du Bois in central southern British Columbia, not far from the city of Kamloops. And what's happening here is we have some saplings growing out of a pond. And I'm looking down at the bottom of these aspen saplings, but what you're looking at is the reflection of the sky and the tops of the trees. But I've purposely eliminated the tops of the trees in my composition other than the reflection. So you don't really know whether you're looking at this upside down, backwards, or what you're looking at. It's always been a bit of a confusing composition, but I really quite like it. A couple of things bothered me about this. First of all, a lot of the grass litter in the pond. There's not much I could do about it. I could try and clone some of it out, but I'm certainly not going to try and clone all of it out. The other thing that I wasn't sure about was the sapling, or the reflection of the sapling on the right side. So what I've decided to do is just make this into more or less a total abstract by, first of all, making it more graphic by turning it into a black and white, really emphasizing those aspen trunks. And then you look beyond those bright areas into the shadows and you see these odd reflections. I think it works. The part that bothers me a little bit is at the bottom center section. It gets a little bit busy in there. But I'm curious to know what you guys think. I've always loved stuff like this where you more or less have to look twice at it to kind of figure out, well, what is it? I wish I could photograph more stuff like this. It's just that I find it quite hard to find. But when I do find it, I get a lot of pleasure out of composing stuff like this because it really tricks the mind. I can't believe that it's been just over a year since I went on my trip down the west coast of the United States with the F4 lads. This photograph here was taken at Cape Disappointment, and I think pretty much all of us got a shot of this wave. I know Tom did for sure, and Greg got some beautiful video of this wave crashing. Now, of course, when you're photographing waves like this, you're using all types of focal lengths. I was using 2 to 500 lenses, or a lens, and also wider lenses as well. Now, this happens to be with a wider lens. I think it was a 70 to 200. So it's quite a loose composition. The great thing about a loose composition, as I said before, is that it gives you the ability to crop it however you want. So I can make this into a pano, a square, a 4x5, 4x3. If I was really tight on this, then it really limits you. Now, luckily, I was using a camera that has a lot of megapixels, it's the Nikon D850. So even if I crop out half of the other information in this file, it still leaves me with a file with a ton of information and enough there to print something if I want to print it rather large. So in this final image here, I've decided to crop it to a 4x5. And as I said before, really all you're doing is trying to eliminate the things that don't add to your main subject or subjects. And in this case, it's the lighthouse and that beautiful wave. And all I've done to the raw file is I've brightened up the wave as much as possible to really kind of emphasize it. And then I've darkened down the cliffs and the sky around that wave just to really give that wave a bit of oomph and bring it forward. And I think it works in this format. Here's another photograph that I took a couple of years ago in the Gobi Desert in China. And I've always liked this photograph, the graphic nature of it. What doesn't sit well with me, though, is the composition. It looks very weighted to the left side. I think when I took this, what attracted me to the scene was that curve on the right, but I don't think it works because the shadows just make it look heavy on that left side, and the bright area on the right, it just doesn't look balanced to me. So what I ended up doing was just thinking about, well, what is it that I really love about this photograph? And ultimately, it's those beautiful curves on the left side, right up until we get that curve on the right side. So what I decided to do was just crop out the right side altogether and make this into a square. And I think most of you will agree that the crop on this works much better. I also turned it into a black and white because black and white tends to really show off the graphic nature of a photograph a little bit better. And I was able to really brighten up certain areas to the point where they're just almost overexposed and darken some of those shadows. So I've added quite a bit of contrast to this. I've darkened areas, brightened areas. So it's a far departure from the original photograph, but it was all intended just to bring out those curves on the left side there. And I think in this case, it works quite well. In this final image, this is a case of where I kind of pre-visualized what it was that I want before I took the photograph. So I've talked about two types of cropping here. We have cropping after the fact, where perhaps your original crop didn't work quite well, or the format that you were using wasn't quite right, or you just want to simplify things even more after the fact. The other method is to crop within the camera using the tools within your camera. And this is the method that I prefer over the other method, although sometimes looking at old images and cropping them and try to fiddle with them to the point where they might work is kind of fun as well. But I just find it more satisfying is if I can look at a scene and think, oh yeah, that'll work really well as a pano or a 4x3 or 4x5 or whatever. And that was the case with this photograph here. Now, I have talked about this before in a previous video, so I won't prolong it too long. But what I really loved about this scene were the reflections and the trunks of the trees, and that's it. The background doesn't add anything, and to my eye, the sky at the bottom didn't add anything to the photograph either. I just wanted to simplify it to the barest of elements. And I think most of you will agree, it's accomplished that. It's very simplistic. We just have tones of blue and those warmer tones. And I've just set up my camera so that all of those trees are well separated from one another, except for the two trees just off center to the left that have those branches crossing. All in all, I was really happy with this photograph, and it's one of my favorites from my trip to Abraham Lake this past fall. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give me a thumbs up. And if you enjoy the content of my channel, be sure to hit that subscriber button. All right, everybody, thanks. And hopefully next week, I'll have another video for you. All right, till then, bye-bye.